All right, everyone. Good afternoon again. My name is Atif Karni. I'm the Managing Director for External Affairs here at the Hope Center. We are, as some of you might know, an action research center, which is focused on transforming higher education into a more effective, equitable, and impactful for the sector. Before I joined the Hope Center, I was actually the Secretary of Education in Virginia, focused on early childhood, K-12, and higher ed reforms at the state level through a variety of ways, including the legislative and policy-making process. This is why I'm so excited about today's webinar, which is focused on exploring a vital food security resource for college students, and that is expanded eligibility for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, formerly also known as the Food Stamp Program. In December of 2020, Congress enables students who are eligible for work study or whose household reports are $0 expected family contribution in their financial aid application to qualify for SNAP without work requirements. The expanded eligibility continues until the end of the COVID-19 public health emergency, which is renewed every 60 to 90 days, and it's likely to continue to the end of 2022. Unfortunately, many college students may not benefit from the expanded eligibility established by Congress because they're just simply not aware of its existence, or mistakenly they believe that they do not qualify. In a recent Hope Center report, our policy and advocacy team explored the extent to which states and territories are upholding their duty to inform students about expanded SNAP eligibility. And we found that just 8 states provided relevant information on their agency websites about expanded SNAP eligibility, and also took additional steps to encourage students to apply for SNAP. We also found that about 24 states provided relevant information on their websites. 18 states did not post any information on their websites about expanded SNAP for students at all. And about 766,000 students who are likely eligible for SNAP at public colleges under the $0 EFC criterion attended an institution in the 18th state that conducted little to no outreach at all. So this afternoon, you will hear from the report's author, Tom Hilliard. He is the senior policy analyst at the Hope Center, and 3 experts who we're really fortunate that they're joining us, who will talk about SNAP eligibility and outreach. The 3 experts are Peter Granville, who's a senior policy associate at the Century Foundation, Hope Lane Gavin, who's a fellow at Health Equity at Center for Community Solutions, and Clantha McCurdy, senior deputy commissioner for Access and Student Financial Assistance at Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. With this, it's my honor to introduce my colleague, Tom Hilliard. Tom, to you.
Thank you so much, Atif. And I want to welcome everyone to this webinar on SNAP eligibility in the time of the public health emergency for COVID-19. And I want to start by encouraging people to ask questions, put them in Q&A or in chat. And when we have a chance to get to your questions, we will, so that we can be responsive to the needs and the interests of the folks who are in this webinar. So what we're going to do today is first go over the issues of SNAP eligibility and outreach, and why this issue even comes up. The starting point is food security among students on college campuses. And the Hope Center has found that food insecurity is widespread. Roughly 4 in 10 students at community colleges and 3 in 10 students at 4-year colleges have reported experiencing food insecurity within the past year. As this slide shows, they have to balance their spending on food with their spending on rent so that they can maintain their housing, because housing insecurity is an even more common problem. And so clearly they should get food subsidies. It's a no-brainer that this would help college students in need. In fact, the take-up rate among students, among non-students, is over 80%. It's hard to say nationally what it is for college students, but the state of Virginia is way ahead of everyone else. They actually track this information, and they found that 88% of low-income students who should be eligible for SNAP do not receive it. So clearly there's a real problem here. So there are a number of reasons for this low take-up, but the main one is a decision that Congress made in 1977 and throughout the 1970s to mostly eliminate food stamp eligibility for students. And over the next several decades, it became clear that college students really needed this aid. But instead of restoring SNAP eligibility or food stamp eligibility, Congress created the set of exemptions that you see here. These limited exemptions are supportive of parents of young children, of students who are mentally or physically unfit, who receive aid from a handful of various federal programs. And what's noteworthy is that these exemptions help some students, but many students they don't help at all. And also that they are complex. It is very difficult for students and the support staff and advisors who help them to know whether a given student will be eligible. So for example, if you do you have a child between the ages of 6 and 12, how do you show that you have trouble securing childcare? Would you even know? And so this complexity makes it very hard for SNAP to work well for students in higher education. But in 2020, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a breakthrough. Congress passed broad exemptions that made it a little easier and a little bit simpler to obtain SNAP. And so first, if you are eligible for work study, you can now receive SNAP, whereas previously you had to actually be enrolled in work study. And the availability of work study slots is its own scandal, and many students do not have access to it. And then students who have an expected family contribution of 0, which is to say low-income students, can also receive SNAP. And I just want to point out that one of the reasons Congress took away eligibility from students is the fear that middle-class students or upper-income students would attempt to look poor so that they could receive SNAP. But if you have a FAFSA that shows that you have an expected family contribution of 0, you have evidence that that's not the case. And so it really shouldn't even come up anymore. So the next step is to tell students that they have this eligibility available. And here we run into the problem. The Department of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Service determines benefits and eligibility for all recipients of SNAP, including students, but they are not the ones who actually tell students or tell their advisors that they may be eligible. So they send guidance to the state social service agency. In fact, the Food and Nutrition Service has said that college students should be a priority area for outreach to the state agencies without really providing additional clarification on what that should mean. And then the state agencies are supposed to interpret that and get the word out to recipients. However, the state social service agencies don't necessarily know where to reach students, because after all, they are not a higher education agency. And so these agencies, for purposes of the expansion that we're talking about, would need to go to 3 entities who would help them provide support. Higher ed systems like the University of Texas or the Virginia Community College System, the State Higher Education Executive Office, which most states have, and the SNAP outreach partner that the state agency uses. And so ideally, the Food and Nutrition Service provides the information to the state social service agency, which in turn reaches out to potential surrogates and partners to get this information out to students, advisors, and other staff at colleges. So the Hope Center wanted to find out the extent to which the state social service agencies were making this information available. And so we went to the websites of every social service agency in the country, every state social service agency, and also state higher education systems, SHIOs, and outreach partners. And we put them into basically 3 buckets. Those states in which you really couldn't find anything at all on their websites to provide this information to students, those that at least put the information and made it available on their websites, and those that did that and also did something more. They provided other information to students. They put a pitch on their website to urge students or colleges to pay attention to this and to enroll in SNAP or something like that. And this provides our findings, which is that 32 states actually put information on their websites. And here we erred on the generous side. So for example, in Texas, none of the state agencies put any information on expanded eligibility on their websites, but the University of Texas did. And so we counted that a win. However, 18 states really did nothing on their websites. They may have done something else. They may have sent information to students, but we have no way of tracking that. And our view is that if a state agency could not be bothered to put information on their website, a fairly low, non-labor intensive method, the odds that they did other things to inform students in colleges seems to be fairly low. So we then wanted to know, well, how many students are we talking about here? So using our support from the Century Foundation and information that I'm about to get into, we found that roughly 1 in 5 students lives in these states that we call a low outreach state. And that is, about 766,000 students. And those are students, and we're just talking about public colleges and universities here, who do not have good access to information on SNAP eligibility expansion. So looking at who we're talking about here, we found that about 6 million students nationwide at public colleges who are undergraduates are 0 ESC students, and therefore are at the lowest level that the federal government tracks for purposes of Pell Grants, Stafford loans, and other Title IV programs. And of those, we estimated that roughly 3.5 million of them are likely to be eligible for SNAP and have not already found other ways of getting SNAP. And this is somewhat generous in that even students who may be eligible for SNAP using other methods, such as parenting students, may not have actually used their eligibility and may not know about it. But still, that's a lot of students. And so the pool of students who could be supported through this expansion is really sizable. 3.5 million students here, 3.5 million students there, and pretty soon you're talking about real numbers. So here are some things that we had suggested that states and the federal government do, which is, first of all, really ramp up the outreach and marketing, focus on the conditional eligibility, that is the possibility that students could be eligible rather than telling them that they're not eligible unless there's some exemption. And then the states should also focus on what to do when the public health emergency lapses. It is likely to be renewed through the end of 2022, but at some point it will lapse. And then we want to make sure that there are processes in place to ensure that those students do not simply lose their SNAP eligibility. And then we're urging Congress to maintain that eligibility for students at least until the Farm Bill is reauthorized in 2023, at which time hopefully it will become permanent. And then the U.S. Department of Agriculture should support state agencies and really clarify for them exactly what they should be doing to conduct outreach to students. So next, we're going to turn to our expert guests for today's presentation. Peter Granville, Clantha McCurdy, and Hope Lane Gavin are some of the smartest and most energetic people out there in this space. And we're going to talk to them, starting with Peter Granville, Senior Policy Associate at the Century Foundation. So Peter, welcome.
Hi, Tom. Happy to be here.
And we're glad to have you here as well. So Peter, you've been researching student access to SNAP for years. Why is it so hard? Why are they not enrolling at the levels of the general population?
Yeah, well, it starts with the rules governing who can enroll in SNAP, as you highlighted earlier. The federal policy is fundamentally designed to exclude college students from SNAP, not to include them. The law is that, as you said, a student enrolled at least half-time is ineligible unless they demonstrate one of 11 exemptions. And these exemptions essentially function as proxies for non-traditional student status, like being a student parent or working 20 hours a week. I would say two things result from the way that this rule works. The first is that many people mistakenly believe that college students just can't get SNAP benefits. That kind of becomes the dominant narrative, and that narrative discourages a lot of people from even starting an application or doing some research about the rules. The next is that this is a complex set of rules for students that's building on an already complex set of rules for eligibility for the full population. It all starts to feel just very like inside baseball. And I would say it's a big lift for students or even a college staff member to learn this system. So once a student starts to apply, they may find the system too impenetrable. They may have no one around really to help them, so they give up. But let's go back to those exemptions for a moment. That rule was written 45 years ago when the non-traditional college student, quote unquote, was a lot more non-traditional than they are today. So when I say that, I mean, nearly 1 in 4 college students today is it's now more common, in fact, for students to work 20 hours a week while enrolled than to not be working at least 20 hours a week. So actually, more students than many people think could get SNAP if they applied. The challenge is breaking through that complexity and helping them through the paperwork. This all leads to too many students not receiving SNAP who could. In my opinion, the most rigorous methods show that only 20% of college students who could receive SNAP actually do nationally, or maybe even fewer than that, as you showed with the data from Virginia. And as the Hope Center has shown better than anybody, food insecurity runs rampant on campuses across the country. SNAP is the best tool we have to combat college student hunger, and it's severely underutilized.
Great, thank you for that, Peter. And I think you're really getting at the contrast between what Congress thought the problem was and what the problem really is. And so looking at the states, what can the states do to connect students to SNAP? Who is responsible? And if you were at an institution and you want to ask for help, who should you ask?
Right. Yeah, I think sort of from the macro point of view, I think of SNAP outreach as a stream of information, like a kind of a stream of water flowing down a mountain. At the top of the mountain is the state government. And from the state, the information flows down to, as you said, SHIOs, counties, outreach partners, from there to individual colleges and staff members, and finally to students. Starting from the state, the flow of information gets, I think, increasingly local. It's not a perfect metaphor, but I do think it's useful for two reasons. The first is that once the information has gotten to the college and the student level, I really do think students are most likely to hear about SNAP from the college staff they interact with, and even more so from other students. Students themselves truly are the best ambassadors for SNAP. A great example of this in practice is the CUNY Student Food Navigator Program, and I know of similar ambassador programs in California. So I think the best people to connect students with SNAP are going to be other students. Word of mouth really is powerful. And if you buy my premise here that information about SNAP mostly reaches people through local channels, then yeah, I wonder if we could do more to pass information along through student groups or let's say through families. Like what information do parents receive about what their child might be able to get if they applied for SNAP? And when students are stuck with an application, they turn to those closest to them. Applying for SNAP is like doing taxes. And when you have a question about your taxes, the first person you call is not the IRS. It's your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your friends. So I think getting information to local communities has to be the #1 goal. But that then leads us to, I think, the other takeaway from that metaphor of the information stream. Colleges and students are all downstream from the state and counties. So what happens when the information about SNAP never makes it down that mountain? The answer is that students won't enroll in SNAP. So to sort of extend this metaphor as far as we can, asking a student to enroll in SNAP without any assistance from the college really is like asking them to go hike up a tall mountain. The really determined ones will find it and they'll find a way to do it, and bless them for it. But a lot of them are going to struggle and likely quit. So as much as word of mouth is powerful, it won't do us good if state governments aren't being proactive to get information about students' eligibility down to the local level, and especially, I think, to colleges. So that's one reason why this research from the Hope Center is so insightful. Your research set a very low threshold for the state actions that would qualify as some outreach. And it was very easy to meet, and a lot of states did not meet it. That deserves attention, and we need to hold states accountable. So, thinking about what should a college student do if they want to enroll in SNAP, canvass as many sources as you can. Go to your county office, look even maybe at information in other states' websites if yours is not one of the ones that's doing a good job finding or presenting that information to you, and ask along. Don't have any shame about looking for that assistance, because there are many students out there, as this research shows, in the exact same position, likely eligible, but just in need of a guide to find out if they can be eligible.
Great, thank you. And we have information in our study on the students who are eligible for SNAP, and those numbers are huge and they are incomplete. And I want to give credit where it's due. Peter, you actually crunched the data to come up with them. Was there anything that surprised you or really struck you as you were putting this data run together?
Yeah, and for background, I used the new release of the NIPSAS survey, which captures really 250,000 students. It's a great resource, and for the first time, it's designed to enable these state-level statistics. Using that data set, we were asking how many students appear to be newly eligible based on this zero EFC provision, and what's the breakdown by state. So I was surprised just when you look at not just the 3 million students who could be eligible, but that as a percentage of those who are college students in the country. There are actually 4 states where the majority of community college students are zero EFC. They're generally poorer states. These happen to be Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and North Carolina. In fact, in North Carolina, more than 2/3 of community college students are zero EFC. That's so many. And 2 of those states were in the low outreach category in your analysis, and 2 of them were in the some outreach category. I do want to connect this back to the conversation we were having about people assume college students aren't, or maybe even should not be eligible for SNAP. And I suspect that one reason why these 18 states didn't proactively communicate the new SNAP exemptions is, to some degree, their leaders just had this idea that maybe college students shouldn't be getting SNAP. They know the policy exists, and it's really easy to put information on a website, but we sadly didn't see that happen. So probably not the case in all 18, but I think it should be called out as a factor. It's the belief that if you're going to college, okay, you must be already privileged. This program isn't for you. And maybe it even normalizes the expectation that college students are supposed to be hungry, or that it's not wrong if they do. But for me, the main takeaway from that data that we ran is just how outdated that philosophy seems to me. millions of college students today come from poor families. The sheer number of college students who come from zero EFC families speaks to, I think, the gravity of even this temporary exemption, which was such a small line item in this massive bill back in December 2020, but could have such a big impact. So for me, how many students could be reached based on just this exemption that targeted the students with the greatest financial need? That to me is the most important takeaway, and about, it's just so important to get that information to them.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I think that's a great note to conclude with. And so I'm going to thank you so much for coming to join us. And I'm going to ask Clantha and Hope to step in.
So good afternoon.
Thank you. Welcome, and thank you so much for making time to be with us today. So Clantha, let's start with you. So Clantha, you are the Senior Deputy Commissioner at the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, and Massachusetts really took the eligibility expansion created by Congress seriously. In fact, that's the question that we received in our Q&A is, who are the states that are really out front doing a good job on this? And Massachusetts is absolutely one of those. And so I wonder if you could talk to us about what you saw as the challenge and how Massachusetts met that challenge.
Thank you, Peter. Let me start out by saying that when we were approached, when the Department of Higher Ed was approached by some of our partners in the state level, we recognized immediately the benefits of SNAP for our college students. But we also realized that this initiative, creating a college student campaign for SNAP, would be very much aligned with our larger agenda items under the equity agenda, where we are focused on a few initiatives that are designed to increase college completion rates for all residents, including African American and Latinx students, eliminating unmet need and eliminating food and housing, technology, insecurities for our college and university students, and also providing adequate support services. So when we were approached, it was, how can we get this message out to students? And it wasn't so much a challenge as it was deciding that this was something that we could actually do. But when you have people coming to you from the governor's office, you find a way. And the format or platform for this was through the state's financial aid office, because we get all of the FAFSA information for students. And so we started out initially, and I'll have to tell you something funny, when we were geared up and ready to go, got a little pushback from Department of Transitional Services, because they said, hey, wait, you're going to send out 110,000 emails to students, and we don't have the staff to respond to the inquiries and all of that. So we developed then sort of a release of these emails over a period of time. We also had to get the staff geared up in my office to respond to students, as well as our campuses. But it was fairly easy to do this. And initially, we sent out some basic information. We started this, I believe, in 2018-19. But over the years, we found a way to personalize the communication that we send to students and take away, let's say, the agency or institutional language, make it something that's fun for reading, while also providing all of the links and helpful information. Obviously, we received information from people saying, don't send me this, I don't need this, and those were a few. But the majority of responses is, wait, you say I qualify, how do I do this? And trying to make sure that they got to the right agencies. So in that first year, as I mentioned, 110,000 email communications. And over the last 2 years, the range is from 84 to 94,000, based on how we've been able to massage what goes out. And one of the things that we found to be very helpful was our IT department decided that you cannot just send out 110 email messages. We need more security. We need to know where these going and all these kinds of things. So we decided to invest in an email technology platform, and that was MailChimp. MailChimp allows you to decide what you're going to send, when you're going to send it, give you feedback on how many emails were open or not open, those kinds of things. But we also sought to, as I mentioned, to personalize that. And we use different kinds of headers or subject matters to get students to open up those letters. First year was, are you eligible for SNAP benefits? Well, you know, if you're a not low-income person, you may not have known much about SNAP. We changed that. And this past year, for the past couple of years, it's Massachusetts college students, exclamation point. Need help paying for groceries? Well, who doesn't need help paying for groceries, especially these days? But also within that, we started out with telling students the amount of money that they may be eligible to receive. And these email messages were signed by the Commissioner of Higher Ed. But the most personal aspect of this was the commissioner putting in a quote that says, "There's no shame to using SNAP. It's how I fed my family when I was a graduate student. Without it, I would have had to drop out and not get my degree." So when you have someone at that level attesting to the benefits of SNAP, and by the way, he probably was back in the days of the 70s when he was in graduate school, or early 80s, but we personalized that. And we've continued to work with our partners, who include the Department of Transitional Services, over 1,400 providers, Massachusetts Law Reform Institute, and of course the colleges and universities, and getting them prepared, letting them know when we're going to drop that mailing so that they also are prepared, because they have to provide some information. But our next thing now is developing more of a platform to remove barriers for students, especially in the remaining months that we have with this project, but also working to see how can the state step in case students are not granted that eligibility. So you've seen us do things on the financial aid side, such as providing housing insecurity projects where our community college students are able to get food and housing during the year at our participating four-year institutions. So we are developing a lot of creative pilot initiatives that we hope to scale up. And also the next biggest challenge is that data sharing with general counsels from both DTA and the Department of Higher Ed, looking at ways that we can make the most and best out of the information that we've collected with this project, and allowing us to, let's say, fine tune it and making sure that we are much more effective. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Clantha. And I think that what you've had to say about Massachusetts strategies also speaks to what colleges will need to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you took a great deal of effort and creativity to address stigma among students, right? It sounds like you were hearing from students or from people in institutions that that could be a big problem.
That is correct. And we found it very helpful to include our colleges and universities in the discussion about the initiative, wanting to pinpoint how do we encourage more students to at least look into this and not feel like we're pointing the finger or there's something about you because you have to utilize SNAP, but just showing the positive benefits of that and the kinds of people who've had to rely on SNAP benefits to get to where they are. Our whole goal is to make certain that students have the resources that they need to complete their studies, whether it's for a certificate program, associate's, or a four-year degree. And this initiative falls right in line with some of the things that we need to be more creative and thoughtful about in reaching out to students.
Great, thank you, Clantha. And I think that your point about working with the institutions is key. And I hope that Hope Lane Gavin, our senior associate from the Center for Community Solutions in Ohio, can talk to us about some of the partnerships that you used to really drive the message about expanded SNAP eligibility.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you for having me. So Ohio is truly a unique place. While some may argue it's trending red or in one direction, after being notoriously purple for so long, you know, it used to say, as goes Ohio, so does the nation, right? But it's still a place where things get done. And so everything isn't partisan here. And Ohio has an incredibly rich advocacy community with incredible influence. And so those partnerships between advocates and nonprofits and the legislature and the administration is pretty strong, regardless of who controls the governor's office or the legislature. So SNAP access for college students is a great example of that. So first, we were really lucky because I quickly learned through this process that not every state has its own Department of Higher Education. Many states combine K through 12 education with higher education, and then therefore there's not a whole lot of capacity and attention to higher education in that state. But Ohio's always been a place known for its legendary and deep institutions of higher education. You know, we have the first historically Black college in the country, and Wilberforce University, and we also have Ohio State University, which is one of, if not the largest land grant university in the country. So it's an extensive network of community colleges and so on. And so because of that, we have a dedicated and committed state agency that was ready to work on this. And so additionally, because of the pandemic, advocacy groups and nonprofits were eagerly watching federal and state legislation, awaiting opportunities and policies and funding to help people during such an unprecedented time. And we obviously had never lived through or experienced anything quite to the magnitude as COVID-19, and thus never seen, you know, a public policy response quite like it. It's truly incredible what both administrations were able to do in such a short amount of time. In Ohio, we have a Health and Human Service table or coalition called Advocates for Ohio's Future. And through this coalition, groups were able to pay attention to different things in different parts of bills specific to their specialty area. And my organization, interested in food access, and the Ohio Association of Food Banks, also obviously interested in ways to keep people fed during this time, saw the Consolidated Appropriations Act provisions, which expanded SNAP access to college students like never before. And we knew we had to figure out the best way to spread the word. A small group of us decided to write up a memo with ideas on how to spread the word. And this included things like training financial aid staff on the new changes to SNAP eligibility, encouraging FAFSA completion sooner rather than later, coordinating with student organizations to get the word out. And we sent it to all of our institutions in the state, as well as the state agency itself and all of the trade associations in our state, like the Ohio Association of Community Colleges and the Inter-University Council of Ohio. After this, we got a tremendous response from all of the recipients, including the state agency, eager to know more. So our state agency obviously has worked on higher education, but never really the intersection between higher education and again, the SNAP program. So not only were the institutions really interested, but the agency was really interested to learn more about just like SNAP just generally. So we started having one-on-one conversations with individual institutions who were really eager to help their students meet their basic needs during this time, especially when statistically so many would not return to college if they were to drop out. So institutions were eager to not allow lack of basic needs to get in the way of their experience. So we were having 2 to 3 of these conversations a day with just individual staff at individual institutions. And we decided to pitch having a webinar to the Department of Higher Education and our State Department of Job and Family Services, which administers the SNAP program in our state, and who we also work closely with and consulted with to ensure that we had all of the details correct about eligibility. In addition to this, to us and our state agencies, we invited some institutions who had already been doing things well, even pre-COVID, having food pantries on campus and SNAP outreach on campus. And so together we held a webinar featuring our state higher education chancellor and over 250 higher education administrators and students in the state. Following this, we still had a lot of questions and inquiries from institutions, but we were able to share the recording of the webinar and the slides with them to have permanently. So this was able to answer most of, if not all, questions. And since then, and since the CAA provisions went into effect, we created like a semi-public Dropbox where we house a ton of fillable graphics for institutions to use or tweak at their free will to promote the temporary expansion for SNAP. And we've done the last 2 years, we've done like a back to school like checklist that we again provide to institutions like and like share out on social media. Like, oh, if you're going to back to school, don't forget your SNAP application as part of your, you know, going to Target and getting all your stuff. And so we are hopeful that this buy-in means that institutions would consider beginning to use their political capital to fight for these provisions to be permanent, since they were so bought in.
That's great. And, we had a question, which I think is a good question for both of you, which is, how do you know whether your outreach is working? Since, the high level data is really difficult. It's not easily accessible. In fact, maybe Clantha can talk a little bit about what states face in tracking this data. But in the absence of that very clear data and metrics, what do you do? How do you know that your outreach is working, or that you need to iterate?
So, Clantha, you want to start?
I can start, sure. Well, without even looking at any data, when you have that increase in your contact from students who are responding to the email, or when you're hearing from your institutions about the traffic that they have, and DTA that's telling you, well, we didn't think about this well enough. We should have planned ahead because we just don't have the bandwidth to handle the traffic. So that's one thing. But, we know how many students have opened the email messages that we send, but we do not know how many of those students actually connected with DTA and receive food stamps or SNAP benefits as a result. We know the increase, but how many of those actually did it because of the email? And that's something that we are now working on, the data sharing. There's a lot of data sharing between agencies, but we are very protective of that data in higher ed. DTA wanted us to just hand over your file so we can go through it. And said, no, we can't do it that way. So we're currently working on that. And I think once we get the green light from our general counsel's office, we'll know exactly how we can match up, because we have an enrollment database and a financial aid database that will just allow us to match those students with DTA. If you have a social number, you can do just about anything. So it's a matter of spending the time to plan it and go through the data match and going from there. And that's our next phase. In fact, anything that we've done over the past 3-4 years, we can go back once we have the arrangements or the agreement and look at data from there. And which is good, because we like to look at 3 years of data before we can start to develop policy and know which way we need to go.
That's great, thank you. So let me ask the two of you to put yourself in the shoes of the president of a college who says, I want to take action on this, or the director of student supports who says, I'm ready to take action on this. This could be an important support for many of our students. What should they do? What should their starting point be?
So for me, graphics, just like social media graphics on bulletin boards, graphics in student unions, Canva is great and mostly free. And it's like attention grabbing graphics, quick, easy to read, to the point. That's kind of what we do a lot in the advocacy space in Ohio. As far as like state agency staff though, the world is changing. Text messages, for example, are better than mail if and when possible, including information about SNAP and college acceptance letters and financial aid awards. It's kind of like any other, campaign, if you will. So it's like, where do you find your target population? Can you do something at bars in town? Can you do something at football games? Can you do something at student centers? It's kind of thinking outside the box when you start talking about college students. But again, like any other campaign, political campaign or issue campaign, find your target audience and cater your messaging and your outreach to them. So is there a way that you can have posters that say sign up for SNAP, or go to this website, or a QR code or something like that? You just trying to be innovative is I think the key.
I think in Massachusetts, we start out with providing the evidence and trying to connect that with our board. And we have found that when you place a student or a group of students in front of the board to speak about their experience being homeless, and not knowing where their next meal will come from. And then you put up the data about how much unmet need these students have who are on our campus, or how we lose students because they have to drop out and try to work because they can't feed themselves. The board takes action. And that has led to the creation of a framework on basic needs. It's led to the creation under our equity agenda, a framework for support services for students, as well as a 10-year equity plan for racial justice, racial equity. So we find that along with that comes the kinds of things that Hope speaks about, the campaign, the advocacy, and getting our colleges on board. But our presidents recognize that if they can convince the board of a need, they'll eventually see that in the budget, right? And we'll be supporting those kinds of things. But within the department, although there's a process, everything has to have that data to support it. So we start with the evidence and you make the point from there. And then we can add on all the things that are attractive and the billboards and things like that, the email messages, but always keeping that message front and center. And then having reports back to the board that, it ends with some kind of news release about the effects of something that we put in place.
That's great. Thank you, Plantha, and thank you, Hope. Those are really valuable perspectives and insights to bring for the people who are in this. So I want to encourage anybody who hasn't already asked a question to feel free to ask. And I think one of the points that was made in the Q&A is that we shouldn't, having observed that there are some states that haven't really taken decisive action on this, we shouldn't presume their motivations in doing this. And I think that the experience that both of you have had in working with agencies shows that they may not be ready right off the bat to do this outreach, but it's not necessarily because they're not interested, but because they may not know exactly what they need to do. And I know that in my experience working with the New Jersey Office of the Secretary of Higher Education, we worked with our Department of Human Services because they don't deal directly with students. They're not a student-facing agency. And so having a collaboration with our office helped them both gain insights and contacts, a network that was helpful in doing that kind of outreach. And would you say that that's the experience of the agencies that you worked with in your states?
I'll start out by saying at the department, we have a great research staff, a couple of wonderful databases, but we have financial aid and we have those FAFSAs, and just about everything that we want to do engages financial aid, right? They have to come to me for any kind of comparison. If you want to know how many low-income students are live in a certain part of the state or whatever, we can get at it in that way. And it's just a lot of collaboration. Our work has led to the hiring of a director of basic needs, security, and policy and programs. We never had that before. We knew that to get this work done, we need someone who can lead it and who can serve as the liaison between different departments. But, it all comes back to the state agency, Department of Higher Ed, and our campuses, and then the other departments around the state, where you look at the fact that you're in this together. We rely on each other for the good of the student, for the benefit of the state. So that's been an approach that has worked really, really well for us.
That's great. Thank you for that. And so let's see, I saw we just had one more question. So then the question was whether the exemptions extend to community college students in non-credit based programs like trade programs or childcare provider programs. And I welcome your answers to this, or Peter's answers. So let me pause for a moment and ask if you have an answer to that based on your understanding of the eligibility expansion.
Don't think I can offer a response to that specifically. But if you're looking at support from Massachusetts, if the department approved a degree or certificate program, then those students are eligible for state aid. But when it comes to SNAP, I don't think I'm the best resource to answer that. So maybe Hope or Peter.
Yeah, I was going to say same thing with Clantha. I'm not entirely sure either. It looks like Peter might have an answer though.
Sadly, no. Same boat.
That's okay. I will say that that students who are in non-degree programs are typically not considered college students and therefore are not subject to the student exclusions. So consultant expert, don't assume that we can answer your questions altogether. However, many of the exclusions that we're discussing are for students who are in degree credit programs. So those students that you're describing may not even be affected by the student exclusion. So I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank all of you for the great insights that you brought to us. And we really appreciate your coming to join us and share your experience with attendees. And so, and with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Atif, you should feel free to join me at this point. You know, what we've heard here is that there are real opportunities for states and for institutions to drive the message out and to substantially increase the number of students who receive food subsidies and thereby really address their food insecurity and stabilize that so that they can focus on their academic studies. So Atif, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just thank you, Tom. And I just, first of all, just want to thank our great panelists, Hope, Clantha, and Peter. Thank you so much for providing the different perspectives. It was especially really great to hear what's happening in Ohio and Massachusetts specifically. I'm a state policy guy in Virginia myself, and definitely stole ideas from other states. So it's good to brainstorm and see all the model practices and different things, innovative things that are happening. And Clantha, I felt like you had like a really good command of understanding of the innovative ways that could be really applied. And I think Hope, like I love the historical perspective with Ohio, and Peter, thank you for giving like this overall snapshot. I mean, you all just, it was great perspectives, and this was our intent, to bring in the experts to think through and have our audience also share, get some great ideas and insights from you all. We are in the midst of producing future reports and briefs, just like we did with this specific report, and holding webinars. So this is just one lane out of many that we have to take. We're taking a holistic approach. So please just keep us in mind at the Hope Center, as we will be producing more reports. Our policy and advocacy team specifically, and holding webinars like this. And just appreciate all the work that you all do. It's a team effort, and it's good to be here with different colleagues and sharing ideas and thoughts. And I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of the week. And thank you again for our great panelists. Really appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you all. And thanks to those of you who attended today. We will try to get something out afterwards to answer any follow-up questions that we have. And we really encourage you to reach out to us with the questions that you may have, and we'll send contact information along as well. Thanks so much to everyone.